Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us. Happy International Migrants Day, and thank you for choosing to spend a little bit of it with us. So, just to introduce myself quickly, I'm Alana, the coordinator of the Civil Society Action Committee, the largest global membership-based platform for collective and coordinated civil society advocacy on migrant rights and protection at the international level. Just want to say as well, this International Migrants Day week, I've been so impressed and energized by a number of fantastic events held by Action Committee members and friends over the past days. Just as a few examples and shout outs to them as well. For example, on Tuesday, the NGO Committee on Migration explored video games as effective alternative media for empathetic storytelling, and Alianza Americas highlighted on-ground realities of deportation and forced return across the US Mexico border. The US has become mainstreamed into public discourse and policy. Political leaders have weaponized negative narratives around migrants and propagated twisted or false information and implemented policies to undermine the human rights of both migrants and the communities they call home. We're also in precarious times for a multilateral system, with funding, the upholding international law, and other key aspects of our fundamental institutions at threat. So more than ever, we need action, commitment, and accountability from decision makers and our elected officials at all levels. And that's why we're pleased today to host this conversation on the recent Joint General Comment/Recommendation by the UN Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, and also by the UN Committee on the Protection of the Rights of All Migrant Workers and Members of their Families, specifically on the guidelines for eradicating xenophobia towards migrants and others perceived as such. This Joint General Comment/Recommendation, recently adopted and launched at the start of this month, follow an extensive process, including many consultations with civil society actors, and is now one important tool we have at our disposal as civil society to advocate for better, more inclusive policies for all of us. And most importantly, today on this International Migrants Day, we want to support our collective capacity to push for concrete action. And so we're happy to welcome Pablo Cheriani from the Committee on Protection of the Rights of Migrant Workers and Members of their Families, Helena Olea from Alianza Americas, and Yankee Wong from Building and Woodworkers International to introduce this recommendation/comment to us and how we can use it in similar UN tools to further accountability, transparency, and push for policy change in our communities. So just a couple of housekeeping things before we start. This event will be recorded for public dissemination afterwards. So if you prefer not to be in this record, please anonymize your name and message our team to let us know. We also have interpretation available in English, French, and Spanish. Please click on the button below to access it. And after the discussion, we'll raise the floor, we'll open the floor for comments and questions. So please sort of refrain from speaking until then, put your mics on mute and raise your hand and we'll call on you afterwards. So just before we turn to the discussion, we also want to highlight the sort of campaign that we saw on this side, the campaign that we have many of these events organized by the co-organizers of this campaign. And I'll call on my colleague, Umo, and maybe if my colleagues Umo and Hector can both wave as part of our team. Umo will also give a quick overview as to what the campaign is about so that everyone knows, and we'll put the link in the chat and then we'll start the discussion. Over to you, Umo.
Thanks so much, Elana, and happy International Migrants Day to everyone. As you can see, this is the Resist, Reclaim, and Realize campaign. My colleague Hector would put in the chat this background if you would also like to use it and to show support about the campaign. But first, let me tell you a bit more about what is this campaign about and why the co-organizers of the Resist and Reclaim and Realize campaign decided to come together for this global call to action. We decided to have a campaign, I think very simply because the times called for it. And so we find ourselves at a time, as Elana already explained, where migration is criminalized. Migrants themselves, their life are at risk every day. They are at risk of deportation and of detention. And so we've also seen that in the global migration spaces that we engage in, we always have to fight. We have to fight even to visibilize human rights and for spaces that often are not even committal. And so something that sparked the response was, why do we have to continue being in these spaces when we try to make space for us, but then we are just feel and not heard, and we are not even being listened to. And so the idea was to come together to resist, reclaim, and realize and highlight that human rights, migrants' rights are also human rights. What are we resisting? We are resisting xenophobia. We are resisting the criminalization of migrants and detention. We are reclaiming the language on migration, especially what we know now that is being used and weaponized by populist leaders and basically just being politicized. Human rights are being politicized. And so we are reclaiming that narrative because we know what are good practices in migration, for example, regularization and recognizing people's dignity. And realize, because we want to realize in general a good future for migrants and for all of us gathered today. And this campaign has been started by a few co-organizers, such as, for example, Alianza Americas, an NGO Committee on Migration, and the Migrant Forum in Asia. But this is not our campaign. This is a campaign that is collective and is for everyone. And so it was first launched at the Global Forum on Migration and Development, the 15th GFMD Summit that happened in September of this year. And since then, we've seen a movement around within migrants communities as well, where they embrace this message. And so we are now currently with the co-organizer working on specifically a document that can also tell you how you can concretely engage. And I think many of you, with the event that you're organizing for International Migrants Day, but also simply with the work that you are doing, you're already embedding all of these principles in the work that you do. But please also stay tuned for next year, because we'll be sharing some of the concrete actions that we can all come together under. And especially, for example, when the International Migration Review Forum will come up, that will be our duty to continue this campaign. We'll also put in the chat the website of the campaign so you can know more. And any other co-organizer who's in the call and would like to share a few words and to complement, they're very welcome to do so. Thanks, Elana, and I'll pass it back to you.
Thanks so much, Umo. Thanks for that great overview. And yes, for anyone who wants to learn more about the campaign, Hector has put the campaign website in the chat for you. So with that, feel free to also ask questions about it later if you would like. But with that, maybe we can turn to our first speaker, Pablo Terriani from the Committee on the well, I was going to say on the protection and rights of all migrant workers and members of their families. It's a bit of a mouthful, but the acronym is CMW. And I would like to ask him, what are some of the main features of this joint general comment/recommendation that you would like to highlight to us as civil society actors interested in its potential uses?
Thank you, Elana. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody. First of all, thank you for inviting me. I'm really pleased to be here with you in International Migrants Day and having the possibility to share with you these decisions that we recently adopted just 2 weeks ago. These joint general comments adopted by the two committees. Just to be brief, what we try to do, and as you said, Elena, it was done through a very participatory process. Some of you, many of you, and many other civil society and migrants' rights defenders participated in the whole process. First, submitting many reports, the very first phase of this process, and then participating very actively in all the regional consultations that were held in each region of the world. No? And that was an excellent contribution to the draft that we were discussing on that consultations and then to the final outcome. No, this participation not only legitimated the process but also made an actual contribution to the text. No, in order to improve the recommendations and the guidelines that we included in these two general comments. Just to be brief, what we try to do is a set of guidelines. First of all, to state how very clearly how narratives are misinforming policies and policies that are including discriminatory rules, excluding migrants from very basic rights that every human being is entitled to, legitimating a very narrow approach to migration, a security-sized approach that then push for the creation of detention centers, pushbacks, externalization, and many other policies that on a daily basis are affecting migrants' rights and also their families. So first, this kind of vicious circle between narrative and policies. So it's not just about hate crime or hate speech, but it's a very complex set of narratives on ways that migration is approached and depicted that gradually has been misinforming policies and practices. So, having said that, then we try to have and to include a very holistic approach to xenophobia through a policy, and so that's why you will find in the first document a number of paragraphs that are directed to describe how a comprehensive policy should be adopted in order to address xenophobia in the short and in the long term. No, I mean, with the classic elements of a public policy for addressing complex and multidimensional issues as xenophobia, also as migration, and also a structural linked to xenophobia, which is racism. So you find recommendations on that information or data gathering, dissemination, social participation, the role of the parliaments, the role of local governments, judicial system, etc. Then there's half of the first document or the first general comment, the 38 of CERT, number 7 in our case, is aimed at flagging intersectionality, how xenophobia intersects with gender, age, ethnicity, race, religion, health status, socioeconomic status, and other grounds for discrimination. So in order to also to flag or to highlight how that xenophobia should necessarily, or a public policy for addressing xenophobia should definitely have this kind of holistic approach and an intersectional approach in order to do it properly. No? And the second document is more, it's called thematic guidelines. Why? Because we try to highlight in particular how, first of all, communication issues, how the narratives, how wrong and narrow the narratives are for describing migration and migrants, and in particular on irregular migration, and then that the narrative has to be radically changed in order to address migration and in particular irregular migration, saying that irregularity is more like a result of policies by action or omission rather than the will of the person to breach the law or things like that. It's more an indicator of vulnerability, again, as a consequence of policy and political decisions. So then there are recommendations to state on how to not address migration, how to not represent migration, and how a responsive, rights-based, gender-based, evidence-based communication policies should be elaborated and implemented. And then there are recommendations on how to monitor by state what media does, what the digital platforms also do, and also those private actors that should implement a set of also regulations for ensuring a responsive approach to migration, a responsive reporting of migration. And then there are another set of guidelines on education policy as a key area for promoting social inclusion and social cohesion especially in the long term, to build cohesive societies through education since the very beginning, initial education and then primary, secondary, etc. And then just to end and to be brief, you will find different thematic section that again tries to first describe this vicious circle, how the narratives, the wrong narratives, have been legitimating detention, externalization, the deprivation of the right to asylum, depriving migrants from due process safeguards, etc., etc. And after describing or recommending how this narrative should change in each of the topics, how the policies should change, based on the proper narrative rather than the one that is misinforming, that policies are affecting rights, that violating rights, that establishing discriminatory policies also in the field of access to social services, education, employment, healthcare, housing, social security, and other services. And finally, there are some recommendations on political participation, and how xenophobia is especially fuel when migrants cannot participate, cannot become full members of the society they live, where they work, where their families are, and they are not, in many countries, they are not allowed to vote at any level, and in that equation, also xenophobia is increased by that fact that they don't access to political rights, not only in terms of voting, but also participating in many other aspects related to the society and to public issues, and also recommendations for preventing the responsibility that states and political parties have for not using xenophobic propaganda or xenophobic discourse during election campaigns. So there are a lot of recommendations on that, how to prevent that, and the responsibility of political parties for preventing xenophobia even within the constituency. That would be all. We could go into details to each of the topics if you want, but maybe one we can discuss later is the two documents have a lot of references to the key role of civil society. That all these aspects that I mentioned include specific recommendations in regards to ensuring effective and meaningful participation of civil society in all these pieces of this holistic policy puzzle that we try to build. Thank you.
No, thanks so much, Pablo, for the really comprehensive overview. And I think, like you mentioned, one of the really interesting and also very comprehensive parts of the Joint General Comment and Recommendation is the way it goes into all these different thematics. And I think a lot of civil society also tend to, either because they have to or because the makeup of the communities is as such, they have to sort of focus, or they have a focus on things like youth or persons with disabilities or racialized groups, for instance. And I know that there's been other thematic joint general comments or similar tools issued as well by the committees in the past. So maybe if you had some suggestions or examples in terms of how have civil society engaged with the committee before and treaty bodies with sort of similar tools, or if you have any suggestions or already ideas in terms of avenues that civil society can utilize to bring this forward. I note that there are some recommendations, for example, to local governments and national governments that civil society can utilize as part of their advocacy. There's obviously actions that civil society can take as well and push, but are there specific avenues as well at, for example, the UN or with the committee where they can use this as a tool for accountability?
Yeah, well, first I would maybe said what I was just mentioning. I mean, if you go to the two texts, you will find many reference to civil society participation, and that states must or should to take all the measures for ensuring that participation. So you will find not only it's a brief one, but a brief section on social participation and community engagement in within the policy. As no, I was saying that this holistic policy should have a lot of pieces. One is this ensuring social participation and community engagement, but then in different topics on the legal framework, on the role of media, digital platform, communication policies. No, there are many recommendations on ensuring different aspects of the process of the elaborating the policy, implementing the policy, also assessing the policies where civil society has to be there, no, and the obligation of states to ensure that. Also, for the follow-up of an assessment of that policy in regards also to detention, access to detention center, you will find in every section, every thematic section. So there is some clues there on how to use that, first of all. Then, of course, in regards to working with the committees, now that these general comments are out there, that means that are part of like our jurisprudence, our standards. So we will use it from now on in every single activity that we do, including the revision of the periodic reports that states have to submit to the committees. Now, in our case, it's just 60 states, but in the case of CERD, it's about 185 or 86 states, including countries that are not part of the convention, like most of the European countries, the US, Canada, Australia, and many other countries from the global north that are not part of the Migrant Working Convention. So that means that this tool now can be used by civil society when they are submitting shadow reports, alternative reports to the committees, or in the case of CERT, for submitting communication. No, I mean individual communications were of victims of xenophobia and how xenophobia led to violation of right to liberty, due process, the right to family life, or any right that is covered by the conventions, but especially by these new standards. So that's two ways of collaborating and using these tools with us. But personally, I would recommend that, we are in a way more like a sounding box of the issues that are going on in the field. So once these issues come to us, we try to do what the states ask us to do. No, that our mandate is providing this technique. One of our mandates is providing this authoritative guidance. That's why states are supposed to be forced to implement these guidelines. No, because it's their decision that gave us this mandate. So through this mandate, we adopted these guidelines that now are back to the field. So it's in the field where the opportunities to use that, are more important than ever, no? And again, this text, what I find it interesting is that you have a lot of opportunities to do something with this. Why? We know that we are in a very challenging context, and that's why we did this, in order to respond to this challenging context. But you will find an opportunity to work with, I don't know, in some cases with the municipality, in some other cases with the state or province or department, this kind of intermediate level of government. In some cases, just with, I don't know, the education authorities of this neighborhood, or to work at the community level, to work with youth policy or child policy or gender policy or at labor or health sector. So you have so many pieces that hopefully in some cases you can work with all these pieces with a government that do have the political will to do good, and to implement coherently the human rights obligations that they assume. But in many cases, unfortunately, this is not the reality, and you will have the opportunity to work with this paragraph, these other 5 paragraphs. So that, I think that's something that is make these tools strong, because you will have many opportunities, and then independent of the context you are working, the opportunities will be more or less, but you can do something. And I trust that in every case you will have a partner, of course, at civil society level, but then, I mean, at the public level, with public authorities, judiciary, no, or human rights institutions, etc., you will have the opportunity to do something, at least step by step. No, I mean, depending on the context, the number of steps that you may do now, but maybe in the future you have more opportunities depending on some political climate that may change, hopefully.
No, thanks so much, Pablo. I think that's very useful to hear, like what we can use with different parts of it and things, and also the different avenues and ways it's going to be sort of incorporated into your work. Maybe now it's a good time to bring in Helena and Yankee as well to talk about it from their perspective, because of course, both from Alianza Americas, being a big group of a big network of organizations and community groups, specifically migrant-led ones, in a context that we can say is very difficult at the moment. And then also from Yankee's perspective of the trade unions, where they push for a lot of collective action as well. It would be great to hear your thoughts, both on the joint general comment, but also how civil society can use tools like this or have used so in the past. Maybe start with Helena.
Yes, Elena, thank you very much. I am really happy to be here today on International Migrants Day, and it is indeed an honor to be here with Pablo on this important date. And it's also an opportunity to acknowledge him for the very important work he has done in the committee. Pablo, we really appreciate your work, and it's with a lot of gratitude and admiration that we look at the legacy that you're leaving in the committee. Thank you for that. I think, and what I particularly like about these comments is the fact that they are really inviting us all. We know that xenophobia exists. We live with it, but we really sometimes have a struggle trying to identify how to approach it and how to try to eradicate it. And that's what I really think is incredibly interesting about these general comments, that they are saying, this is what it is. Let's define xenophobia, which is really important. And now let's look at it from an intersectional approach. I think that's very valuable because it is also an opportunity for groups that are working specifically on gender issues, on children, on persons with disabilities, on health and human rights, on the specific situations of racialized groups, of indigenous communities, to think about how that intersects with xenophobia. And then the recommendations also continue kind of spelling out and saying, okay, you want to address it? This is how you could do it. And there are specific recommendations depending on whether it's to national or federal governments, whether it's, as Paulo was just saying, to national human rights institutions, but also to local governments. So in many ways, these general comments are kind of like a to-do list. So if civil society is saying, we have a problem with xenophobia, what should we do? These are really, a first start of saying, these are the things you should be addressing. This is a way to go forward. And I think that in that sense, they are extremely useful. And it's also an invitation for us all. It's also the end of the year. Many of us are working and thinking of how we move forward, the planning we do. To look at these general comments as as a source of inspiration, and to think about what is it that we're going to do next year. It's not enough to say that is a xenophobic comment, that is xenophobia. What we really need to start thinking is, how do we change conditions so that it advances? And I think it's a time where we are seeing that there are fights and struggles we need to address at the national level, but that the local level is also extremely important. And there may be sites where we can definitely advance, where we see that local governments understand better than others that these are persons that live under their jurisdiction, that these are community members. They are not thinking about nationality. They are thinking about human beings and the needs they have. And that's where I find that there is a lot of richness, an invitation for us not only to think strictly, on matters concerning immigration issues or even labor issues, but to think more broadly. How does housing and housing planning contribute or not to xenophobia? That may be something that sometimes we leave at the back of the list. Well, these general comments are also an invitation, and they are saying, no, 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 don't leave that for it. That's not for the future. That's for now. And I think it opens up possibilities for us all. So I would invite everyone who's joining this conversation today to take the time to read it carefully, to find what works and what makes sense with your organization, with the specific work you're doing. But it's really a great source of inspiration for our work moving ahead. And so I think from that sense, we have to really thank and appreciate the committees. And I would argue this is not only a conversation to have in the following reviews of either STIRD or the CMW convention, but it's really something that we have to think how it's intersectional to the other work we're doing. So to me, it's also something that, for instance, we need to bring to the IMRF if we are concerned with the Global Compact and its implementation. So it's not only for the human rights bodies, and it's that we can also bring them to our advocacy on, domestic legislation, even local ordinances or resolutions. So I think that if you take the time to review those two documents, each of them is only 20 pages. I also think that's something that we appreciate about them. They are not particularly lengthy. They are a very useful source to us all. So thank you for them, Pablo.
No, thank you. Thank you so much, Helena. And yes, thank you, Pablo, as well, and the committees for the work. I think there was also a lot of power in the ways that you designed the process that specifically included civil society at the regional levels and really tried to do a lot with a very limited budget. So I think we really appreciate that. And also, I really like your comments, Helena, about the power and the specificity of the language and being able to name things and understand, because you're so right that we often can feel when something's xenophobic, but to have the specific language and the measure to call it out and say this is why, that is very powerful. Maybe turning to you, Yankee, now in terms of from a labor trade unions perspective, what do you think?
All right, thanks, Helena, and happy International Migrants Day to all. Now, before I start, I'll just quickly make an introduction about who is BWI. BWI is a Building and Woodworkers International, is a global union federations, and basically we are the trade unions. We represent like around 12 million members who are coming from the sectors, the building, construction, building materials, and then wood and forestry. And for these sectors, if you can see, majority of them, they are coming from the migrant communities, right? And who work in the precarious working conditions. So yeah, we are one of the including IDWF, we are really pushing a lot of the agendas for migrant workers. So first of all, I think a big shout out to the civil society members and anyone here that involved in the participation of the consultation process, and also thank you, Pablo, for bringing this together. And I believe this document, one of it that catch my attention is like especially it has been explicitly mentioning about the definition of xenophobia and how it forms xenophobia, all these kind of things, because for example, like we all know that ISID was adopted maybe in 5 decades ago, and more than 5 decades ago, in 65 years, 1965. But I believe even though we have mentioned clearly that no one should be discriminated based on their nationality, etc., but I believe the circumstances have also changed, and where xenophobia has become more prevalent right now. So I think it's very good to mention and to address this issue specifically. So I think this is very well done, and at the same time, I believe this is where, like Elena, you're at your top left, right? How to reclaim the narrative. I think this is part of it that very well done, because we even mentioning to address no one is illegal, right? And no one is illegal. in this term. I think we should really utilizing these documents or these papers to reclaim all this narrative and to push forward to educate the medias and the civil society members about the narrative building. And I would say because when we see all of these things, right? Because trade unions, we are very get involved in the ILO mechanism. So we use the conventions, we go to the International Labour Conference to put our concern, all these kind of things. But when we talk about UN mechanism, it's the part that trade unions are starting picking up right now, because we know that we cannot only rely on one mechanism, but we should utilize whatever mechanism we have within the UN system, right? So I mean, like, this is very good experiment. I'm not sure whether how far we can go, even though people might questioning back about like how effective it can be, right? Because after all, it's non-legal binding. Is and even ISER, even though we rectify ISER, it's also up to the state whether they want to implement every single articles that mentioned in ISER, even though they already mentioned the state obligations. But when you have Donald Trump there, we're not sure whether this can be implemented. I mean, like, especially we have more and more far right leaders being elected, right? So it seems like it's really up to the state actors whether they want to pick up the papers, the recommendations that we put forward. So, but I think it's not the time for us to despair, right? I believe that instead of, like, doing nothing, we should try to do something on this. So what I can see, we can actually use this as a benchmark, use this as the things that we are going to, like what we usually do for the periodic review, set it as a benchmark that this is the gold standard you should reach for all the states. And then civil society members, trade unions, we use the languages, we use whether you have achieved the recommendations that have been mentioned in this paper. And then we review and we put forward. And because it's very important for us to archive all these kind of things, because to record the current history, right? So this is the first thing. And second thing, what I see here is, in fact, for trade unions, we can put this paper forward during the collective bargaining, even though these papers are mentioning mainly on how the states should put forward, maybe the policy, maybe how they should amend the law, etc. We should let the employers know as well, right? This is the languages they are developing right now. So in order to become an ethical business, right, you have to also adopt the UN language right now. So for example, when you are hiring the migrant workers, right? Those zero recruitment paying principles, all these kind of things. But we also need to mention that we must advocate for equal pay for equal work. So you cannot discriminate migrant workers because they are the migrant workers, and then even though they are doing the same amount of work, same quality of work like what the local workers do, but because they are not regulated, so you give them lower wages, right? So I think this is the part we should really put forward and try to talk with the employers in using this as a collective bargaining. And this should also apply to our global framework agreement, because like BWI, we also signed global framework agreement with a lot of MNC. So I believe this is a time for us to start reviewing the text being stated in the collective bargaining agreement and also the global framework agreement. And then I would also recommend, I'm not sure whether we can done this, but I think we are still at the very beginning stage, and we try to experiment whatever we can. I sincerely believe we should take this, especially those state actors who rectify the convention, right? And usually the court may refer back to the UN Convention. So in fact, I strongly recommend civil society members or even trade unions members to bring this as a strategic litigation or judicial activism. Try to bring this language to the court and challenge, if let's say, for example, like the right to access to healthcare, right to access to education, all these kind of things, to bring forward why the for example, the refugee children cannot access to the education or to the healthcare, or if let's say they can access to the healthcare, but they need to pay a higher things. So I believe that we need a lot of talent. We need to build our talent pool right now and try to experiment in different countries, bring it forward to the court. And if let's say the government doesn't want to change it using it through parliamentary process or even through the executive policies, we'll bring it to the judiciary process. I hope that we can at least achieve something throughout this, right? And last but not least, I think is I agree with what Helena said just now, because MRFF is coming up, and these documents, these papers should actually become also the core reference when we want to put forward our recommendations in IMRF, right? So it has to be starting from different regions, how we localize and contextualize in our region using these papers. So I'll stop it here first, and then hope we can discuss more. But I also love to hear from you, Helena, and also Pablo, about the feedbacks and the comments about what I have suggested as well. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much, Yankee. And I think, yes, I really also like how you point out that especially at labor level, the distinction between a worker who's a migrant and a worker who's not oftentimes even has inherently xenophobic undertones in the way that they approach it. And it's these small, if we can say maybe microaggressions, but small levels and small mindsets, like small in terms of not being noticed, but sort of automatically assumed as being acceptable or embedded into our policy systems, whether it's by businesses, whether it's by governments at different levels. It's these ways where xenophobia actually creeps in and opens the door for the levels of xenophobia that we're seeing now in many countries. So maybe I do want to turn back to our speakers, but if anyone has any comments, reflections as well on this discussion from the audience, please do raise your hand. In the meantime, whilst people think about that, I would also like to invite Helena and Pablo to also reflect a bit on this and how they see it, like sort of inspiring them to take this work forward, working with the different stakeholders, also the ways in which they are now thinking. I know, Pablo, your mandate is unfortunately ending, but I know you're also going on a bit of a world tour, if we can say it, in terms of having it be adopted and implemented into different things. So do you have any reflections as well now in terms of how you want to embed this into the work that you are doing in different levels? So maybe we can do Pablo for a couple of minutes and then come back to Helena and then Yankee.
Well, very brief, because maybe there's some other people that would like to take the floor. First, thanks for the comments, and I totally agree with you in every single aspect. I mean, the idea of the to-do list, Helena, I like it very much, but also in terms of finding opportunities. I mean, you both mentioned different opportunities ahead that I think are critical moment for bringing these tools, in addition to other tools that are already there, no? Because it's just more like tools that complementing the ones that already existed and more focus on children, on detention, etc. So I think these opportunities are critical. There's a first phase of disseminating this, no, and trying to make people know about this, but then finding opportunities to do policy change, to do actual change, and then in that aspect, of course, I agree with Jan. I mean, there's a discussion on the legal nature of the general comments, if they have the same legal nature or binding nature that the treaty. But at the end of the day, what I think now what matters more is whether there is political will to do what must be done or not, because even treaties are not being fulfilled. No, there are no discussion that human rights treaties are binding for those countries that did ratify the conventions. But nevertheless, the reality is what it is. No, they are not. I mean, they are adopting legislation against those treaties, practices against those treaties, etc. So, in any case, you will always need the political will to do what has to be done. So we need to keep on working and to identify these opportunities. So I will stop here because I think that I trust that many other people would like to say something. Just one thing related was something that was in the chat. Yes, our convention, the Migrant Worker Convention, was ratified only by 60 countries. That's why also we did this, because now these guidelines are for 186 countries. as we did with the CRC in the general comment back in 2017. But nowadays, I mean, it's not in the 1990, but nowadays, many countries that are part of the convention are receiving countries from countries from the global south with much less resources and institutional strength, etc., for addressing the challenges of migration. And nevertheless, they do it. They do it with the ratifying treaties, engaging with the committee or with other human rights mechanisms. So, yeah, so that is something that need to be bring to the country from the global north. No, that like Colombia. Colombia received 3 million people in only a few years, with almost non-contemporary experience as a receiving country. Nevertheless, they ratified the convention. They dialogue with the committee. I mean, then of course, in every case, it's about political will. What they do after that. And they didn't create a whole detention system and a massive pushback, externalization, detention, etc., and deportation machinery. Even receiving 3 million people, while at the same time it's still dealing with the armed conflict and forced displacement, internal displacement, etc. So, I mean, it can be done. I mean, even if there are many challenges in each country, including Colombia. So, no, it's something that I mean we could use for some discussion that we have with the at policy level with countries from the global north, no, that didn't ratify the convention. Stop here. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Pablo. And if it's okay, Lena Yankee, is it okay if we go to Patty's raised hand first? Yes, so Patty, please come in. And there's also a question in the chat that I see.
Thank you so much, Elena. Thank you, Pablo. I'm reminded that from the African Non-State Actors Platform, we have interacted, I think, in the consultation in Europe, and also we had 2 colleagues join the consultation with that was hosted by Madame Diallo in really trying to bring this closer. So I thought, to be very punctual, I think it was like you were reading my mind in terms of where the loose ends on the ratification. And I think I would totally agree with you in how much more should be done in the global north, because I think that the feeling was also, and I think this reflection was held much more by national human rights commissions that attended the consultation that was there in Dakar in Africa, that there was always this inclination for global south to get the grip on dealing with human rights, and quoting sort of one of the political leaders on the continent, that when he was addressed by a journalist, asked about so what are you doing about human rights, and I think his reaction was to say that we are concerned about human rights on the African continent, but it's not just that violations are not just happening on the African continent. For example, they are massively happening also, for example, in Europe and in other spaces. And every day we continue to see how instruments are being used to sort of violate human rights in a very non-conventional way. So it's as though the violation of human rights is very sophisticated today in the global north, because it's sort of embedded in systemic things that can be very difficult for us to make white and black. And I think this was one particular one, but I think an important part of the ratification, but also the follow-up, which is the concern of civil society, trade unions, and diaspora who are part of the African Non-State Actors Platform, is how do we follow this up? So beyond ratifications, how do we really see the changes that we want to see on xenophobia, both looking at the role that human rights commissions have on the continent, whether there's a ratification or not, and there are many sightings and examples that can be given, but also talking a little bit more about how do we see a bit more of a robust monitoring, right? And that I think will speak a lot to the testament of the very important work that you and Madame Diallo put together in drawing this recommendations from various regions. So these monitoring tools will be really important, and I think they're really embedded at the national as well. And there was a lot of emphasis in the Africa consultation, for example, in talking with parliaments, the judicial system, but also how do we talk to non-traditional dialogue partners, and how do you sort of reinforce the danger that you see in terms of negative narratives, and how do we keep indeed local actors really focused on on the standards and the human rights approaches, that we don't have double standards when human rights approaches are being looked at. But really, from the African perspective, it was also the regional organizations that keep accountability, in some cases, even much more than national governments will. And so I thought, just to bring these points, I'm sorry I have to dash off because we have another webinar for International Migrants Day, but I thank you for your reflections. I thought, Yanke, it was also very interesting to hear more, but I will write a little bit more in the chat for us to stay connected. Thank you so much. Thank you, Alana, Umu, for the organization. And Hector, thank you.
Thanks very much, Patty. Thanks. Really interesting to hear your reflections, as always. I know we only have a few minutes left, so just want to ask if anyone else in the audience or participating would like to come in with any reflections. Please raise your hand if you would. I know it's also quite a lot of information and things to think about. And I also saw that Carol asked a question in the chat. That thanks so much, Helena, for answering. And Pablo, if you would like to also write something to answer, but I think Helena answered also very succinctly. In this case, in the last few minutes, maybe we can come back to you three on sort of a final. Maybe if there was one thing that you would like your organization to do now in terms of taking this tool and using it in your own advocacy, your own work, or you would like them to do, it would be great to hear what it is, or one thing that you wanted to take away from this conversation. Maybe I can start with Helena. Is that okay?
Yes, sure. Well, I think that one thing for us to do internally is to identify specific actions that we are going to undertake to address xenophobia. Not simply to call it out in a statement, but what are we doing about it? And for us, in the context of the United States, narratives is a very important entry point. We have to ask ourselves, how did we allow our societies to have elected the leaders they have, and for this anti-immigrant demonizing narratives to have, prevailed within our societies? And so I think it's incumbent on us to understand how those narratives are produced, and then to really work on, anti-narrative campaigns and actions. There is also a section on the second recommendation on that, which I think it's also very important, and it's an invitation also to think about trainings that institutions should hold or other things. And I think that's a very interesting and specific action point that we need to undertake as a priority in the context that we are finding ourselves.
Thanks so much, Lena. Maybe Yanke, and then we'll finish with Pablo.
Right. I mean, the one element that I'm very particularly interested in is the how to establish this firewall, because especially for us, the unions try to organize the migrant workers. Sometimes it's pretty difficult, especially they know that they will put their safety or even their work and livelihood at risk, right? Because if let's say they are their rights are being violated, and then they are fear to report it and then file grievances, all this kind of thing. So I believe this has already shown us how, the papers show us actually how can we establish this kind of firewall, and then to protect the migrant workers. So we hope that we can use this as part of the organizing tools to, to organize the migrant workers. Yeah, thank you.
Well, I would first of all invite all of you, if you can, to read the whole documents, and maybe to do it with the members of each of your organizations and your partners, and then identify, okay, which of these recommendations, I can do something now, no? With who, which are the partners to work with on this topic or these other recommendations, how to complement these recommendations with other that I've been using, that we have been using for advocacy or litigation or whatever. And then, yes, just drawing some kind of plan of action on that to work together. It's an invitation to build bridges and to build alliances, or to strengthen the alliances they are working with. for instance, something that I was already discussing with some people here at local governments. They are telling me already, share with us formally these general comments, and we will we will present a project at the local parliament in order to endorse them. So those guidelines will become immediately a legal guidelines of the municipality of this area or this area. So maybe we can begin to identify cities that become like sort of allies or friends of these guidelines through endorsing formally. And that would be the first step to do many other things at local level. Just one idea. I mean, we could then, through the reading of these documents, we could find many others depending on where we are, which are our partners, which are the opportunities, how challenges the context, etc. But again, and of course, I mean, again, invitation to work together is more important than ever.
Thanks so much, Pablo, Helena, Yankees, for all this. I think we have a lot to take away from this. And I know that even particularly in our own team with the Civil Society Action Committee Secretariat, we're going to be using this joint general comment and recommendation to really also interrogate our own policies, the ways in which we also shape our advocacy language, because I think the ways in which we approach many of these topics could also be not the narrative that we need to change perspectives, right? And so in reference to a lot of what Helena said, and I think that understanding what really drives xenophobia is something that we all think we understand to a level, but the specific mechanics of it is still not well understood. So this joint general comment recommendation is really key to that, and we thank you very much. So thank you all three of you and everyone as well attending for being part of this discussion. We will be sending all this material out. We hope to also engage more with this tool and with others. And we also invite you all to go to the other events that are being held today right after this. So actually starting now, as Patty mentioned, the African Non-State Actors Platform is having one on local actions and youth focus on the African Union Free Movement Protocol. Alianza Americas later will also have a really interesting event that I'm personally very much looking forward to and tuning into as well. It's at 1 p.m. New York time and 7 p.m. Central Europe time, and it's called You Have Arrived in Hell, Torture and Abuse of Venezuelan Migrants in El Salvador. So we thank everyone. I think particularly Alianza as well. We know that you're in a difficult situation, and bringing attention to these topics is one that is extremely important, but also we know that's not done without risk to your team and to your work. So we really appreciate your bravery. We appreciate everyone's work here and everyone's continued push for migrant rights and protection. And stay tuned as we have more of these discussions and lead up to the International Migration Review Forum next year. But thank you so much, everyone, and we hope to stay in touch. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. See you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.